You hear about the US national debt all the time, right? It's this huge, almost meaningless number. But today, we're not talking about the whole thing. We're talking about a very specific piece of it, a piece that has a very, very real deadline. $10 trillion. Now, just to be clear, that's not the total US debt. Nope, this is just the amount of debt that has to be paid back, or let's be real, refinanced, in the next 12 months alone. And here is where it gets really tricky, because the usual customers, the ones who have been happily buying up all this debt for decades, well, they're starting to walk away from the table, and that creates a huge problem. You know, as soon as you hear debt crisis, everybody's mind just jumps to politics, to blame games. But I want you to set that aside for a minute. What we're looking at here isn't about red versus blue. It's just a gigantic math problem with a non-negotiable due date. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of this. What is all this debt actually? And why is this $10 trillion deadline suddenly so important? So the way the US government borrows money is by selling these things called treasury bonds. They're basically just IOUs. And for pretty much our entire lifetimes, they've been considered the safest possible investment on Earth. I mean, everybody wanted them. Now, here's the catch. A massive chunk of these bonds, these IOUs, were sold back in 2020 to 2022 when interest rates were practically zero. And now they're all coming due. The government has to pay them back. And how do they do that? By selling new bonds to pay off the old ones. This slide lays out the problem perfectly. Think of it like a mortgage. Imagine you got a home loan with a crazy low interest rate a few years ago, but now you have to refinance at today's much, much higher rates. The amount of money you owe hasn't changed, but the cost to carry that debt has absolutely skyrocketed. So what does that actually mean? Well, to refinance that exact same $10 trillion in debt, the US government is now looking at paying around 9 times more in interest. That right there, that's the core of this math problem. So not only is this refinancing a lot more expensive, it's happening at the worst possible time, right as those reliable old-school buyers are heading for the exits. So where did they all go? For the longest time, big foreign countries were the #1 customers for US debt. But just look at this chart. Countries like China are dumping US treasuries at a record pace. And they're not the only ones, but they're a huge piece of this puzzle. So why the change of heart? Well, it really boils down to 3 big things. First, trust. With all the global tension, countries are worried their US assets could get frozen. Second, they're just better places to put their money now. And third, they can do the math too. They see the US debt piling up and are starting to wonder if it's really a safe bet anymore. This quote just nails it. For decades, the entire world operated on one simple assumption, that the US economy would always grow faster than its debt. That fundamental belief is what made US bonds so safe. But right now, that bet is looking pretty shaky. Okay, so let's connect all these dots. What does this actually mean for the economy and, more importantly, for you, if the US government suddenly has trouble finding enough people to lend it $10 trillion? Well, it kicks off a pretty predictable chain reaction. See, if there aren't enough buyers, the government has to sweeten the deal. That means offering higher interest rates. But those higher rates make the government's deficit even worse. And if things get really bad, the only option left is for the Federal Reserve to step in and basically print money to buy the debt, which, as we know, leads straight to inflation. And here's where it really hits home. The interest rate on a US Treasury bond is kind of the foundation for everything else. When that rate goes up, you can bet the rates on your mortgage, your car loan, and your credit card are going to follow suit. Your monthly bills literally get more expensive. To give you some scale here, the US government is already paying over $1 trillion a year just in interest. That's more than the entire defense budget. And every time rates tick up because of this refinancing mess, that number gets bigger, forcing some really tough choices down the line. Now, I want to be really clear about something. This isn't some doomsday prophecy. The US is not on the verge of collapse. But we have to be honest with ourselves. This system is under a kind of pressure that it really hasn't seen in a very long time. So, given all this, what's the move? Now, this is not financial advice, but I want to give you 3 frameworks, 3 ways to simply think about your own money in an environment like this. First thing, take a look at any bonds you might own. And here's why. If you're holding a bond that pays you, say, 2% interest, and the government is now selling new bonds that pay 5%, well, who's going to want to buy your old one? The value of your existing bond has to fall to compete. It's a hidden risk a lot of people don't think about. Second, it's worth taking a minute to understand why people are talking about gold again. See, gold doesn't pay you any interest, which is why it's usually less attractive than a bond. But when people start getting nervous about the safety of government IOUs, gold starts to look a lot better as a pure store of value. It's no accident that central banks are buying it up like crazy. And third, think about your own debt. If we're heading into a period of higher interest rates because of all this, then any debt you have with a variable rate, like some mortgages or credit cards, could get really expensive really fast. Locking in a fixed rate, if you can, is basically a way to protect yourself from that uncertainty. So the main takeaway here is that this isn't some far-off problem we can worry about later. This $10 trillion refinancing window is wide open right now. The decisions that get made over the next 12 months are going to send ripples through the entire economy for years to come. And that really brings us to a final question I want you to think about. Be honest. Before this, were you even aware that this massive refinancing cliff was happening? Or did the sheer scale and speed of this whole thing kind of catch you by surprise?